are back, and they are here to stay. But no need to fret, they just want to play.
Hello everyone, 5 Minute Late here. Hope y'all are having a wonderful day so far. Well, it is officially Halloween, which unfortunately means the end of haunt season is upon us. But with that, I can now make my review for Halloween Horror Nights for 2023. Now 2023 was definitely an interesting year to say the least. The first announcement came actually on Halloween night of 2022, which I thought, wow, this announcement season was going to be pretty interesting for the year. But it turns out it was the exact opposite, and it was not good. We didn't get our second reveal until like in the middle of June, late June. There would be times where construction would be making great progress and we would still hear little to nothing from Universal regarding what's to come for Horror Nights. And the final announcement didn't even occur until August 31st. Literally a whole week before the event starts. 5 days before team member preview, if you count that. So yeah, everything was just like rushed and last minute and just jumbled together and thrown in together for announcement season. It was not the greatest.
Sweet mother of God, what is the holdup?
But we're not here to talk about the terrible announcements. Honestly, that could be its own video. But for this video, we're going to be doing reviews for houses, terror tram, scare zones, you name it. So just like my 2022 video, I'm going to be ranking the houses from worst to best, discuss my thoughts on the terror tram, and talk about any other miscellaneous thoughts I have regarding the event. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off the ranking is my number 8, and my number 8 is going to be Holidays in Hell. Now, I know this maze has a lot of fans, and I'm not saying Holidays was terrible this year. Honestly, the only reason why it's my least favorite of the year is because it's a direct repeat. When it comes to returning mazes, I mostly know what to expect before I even walk in. And when I see that they made little to no changes to the house, I always walk out feeling underwhelmed. I already know what the set pieces will look like, I already know what characters I'll see, and I already know where the scares are. So because of that, it's pretty boring in a lot of ways because of how predictable it is. And wouldn't you know it, Holidays in Hell was no exception. With that being said, I still found myself enjoying my experiences with the maze, mostly because of the scare actors, and the vibes and energy from the 2019 version is still actually pretty present in this one. So it wasn't like Killer Clowns from last year where it was just depressing to walk through because it just felt like they threw it in there in the maze lineup because they didn't know what else to put. And I was actually so tempted to put this one at my number 7 because of how inoffensive it was. But overall, I just had to put this at the bottom of my ranking because it is a direct repeat at the end of the day. But again, that's more of a me thing, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this one. On to number 7, my second to least favorite. I'm gonna give the 7th spot to Universal Monsters Unmasked. Now, I wasn't all that ecstatic to go through this one, but somehow it still kind of let me down. Like I said, there was a moment where I considered placing this below Holidays, and part of it is actually because of this maze's weaknesses. I truly do think the lows of Unmasked are pretty low, but I also think the highs are really high. I actually do like the selection of characters they decided to represent for this year's maze. It was nice to see the more underrated monsters get the spotlight this time around. I also like some of the sets here. I especially like the catacombs with the phantom popping out here and there. I also enjoyed the set piece with Quasimodo and his cauldron of hot soup. But while some of the set pieces were great, the majority of them just consisted of the infamous black walls that we all know and love. But that's not even my biggest gripe with Unmasked. It felt like John Murdy and his team didn't really know what to do with these characters. So all the different segments felt jumbled together in a story that felt like it wasn't going anywhere. I also do not care for the facade. It legit looks like a cereal box. I did like the little newspaper stand with the skeleton lady who was essentially our narrator for the maze, but that's it. So unfortunately, not only was this my second to least favorite house of the year, but it might also be my least favorite Universal Monsters maze we've had so far. My number 6 is going to be Stranger Things 4. I was cautiously optimistic with this one walking into it. During my very first experience, I was enjoying what I was seeing. I was glad they didn't mess up Vecna. His costumes look really cool, and I thought they utilized them pretty well. I also like how well casted the base characters were, and I really enjoyed a lot of the sets here as well. even though the Creel house is literally just a flat image that looks like it was made out of cardboard. But under the lighting, it doesn't look that bad. And while I was digging Stranger Things for the most part, it just abruptly ended. And that's my main issue with this maze. It is way too short. They had a whole soundstage. They could have easily added one or more 2 scenes from the show. Every time I walked out of Stranger Things, I always felt underwhelmed because of the length. I also have a very specific bone to pick with this maze. While I did think the sound design was pretty good, it just completely baffles me that they didn't include any of the songs from the soundtrack. The final showdown with Vecna and Eleven was the perfect opportunity to play Running Up That Hill, but they didn't play it for whatever reason. The song is nowhere to be found in the maze. And I'm also so angry that they didn't recreate one of the most iconic moments of the whole show, the Master of Puppets scene. When people think of Stranger Things 4, they think of Eddie Munson and that scene of him playing the guitar on top of his trailer. If you didn't represent that scene, you didn't do season 4 justice, in my honest opinion. No, I'm lying. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. A lot of fans were probably so excited, expecting to see that scene come to life in front of their own eyes. But Universal was like, nah, let's include that 10-second moment where Nancy is strapped to a chair and Vecna scares her a little bit. And it wasn't even Vecna in his true form, it was just him taking the form of Papa. A lot of fans speculate that Universal just couldn't afford to get the rights to those 2 songs. But I think that's BS because 1, the house in Orlando actually features both songs, and 2, they played those songs at the Stellar Bar. They played the entire season 4 soundtrack as a matter of fact. So obviously it couldn't have been a rights issue. They just didn't want to include those songs for whatever reason. So while it's still a very well made house, Stranger Things is number 6 on my ranking, mostly because of the amount of missed opportunities. But at least it wasn't as bad as the last Stranger Things maze, which honestly isn't saying much because that's a pretty low bar. My number 5 is going to be Evil Dead Rise. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know exactly how I felt about this one after a couple of my run-throughs. It did remind me a little too much of Universal Horror Hotel from last year, but that wasn't really Evil Dead's fault, it was the intended vision. So I was hoping I would get used to it and I would enjoy the maze for what it is. And sure enough, the more I experienced it, the more I enjoyed it. In fact, I also dislike Horror Hotel more and more after every run-through, which is really funny. The thing I liked the most about Evil Dead were the scares, mostly where they were placed. In some rooms, they were just relentless when it came to the scares. You would walk through a hallway and you would get a scare behind every door you walk by, and the room where all 3 of the main Deadites come out all at once is a lot of fun. It also did help that the scare actors were doing a great job with their roles. They also adapted the scenes from the movie very well. The sets look really movie accurate, but my only issue that I have with this maze is the pacing. It was built in the space where the Walking Dead attraction used to be, but apparently they never tore down the concrete walls inside, so the creative team had to work their way around that, and it definitely shows. There were moments where I felt like I was in the actual apartment, but there were also times where I would walk through a bunch of blank hallways with not much going on. The ending was also pretty awkward. They're supposed to be in the parking garage, and the first thing you see is the projection of the 3-headed demon, but then you walk through like 3 hallways in a row before you see the bloody elevator, and then it ends with you walking through more hallways with puppets and scare actors playing Beth coming out of boot holes. And then that's the end. Moments like that were scattered across this maze, so it would be very intense and fast-paced, but then it would become more mellow and uneventful in an instant. But other than that, Evil Dead Rise is a lot of fun. We are now halfway through the ranking, and I'm gonna be real with you guys, I felt pretty confident with my bottom 4, but making my top 4 took me quite a while. During my first few experiences at Horror Nights, I thought the 4 remaining houses were equally so good in their own unique way, but after almost 2 months, I think I finally came up with a top 4 that I'm comfortable with. So, coming in at number 4 is The Exorcist Believer. I wasn't really all that excited for this one. A promotional maze based on a horrible looking legacy sequel brought to us by the guy who made Halloween Ends just sounded dreadful to me. And when I saw The Facade, which is literally just the title of the movie, I chuckled at how bad it was. And at that point, I just thought, okay, let's just get this over with. And color me shocked. I was not prepared for how intense this was. It was very similar to the original Exorcist maze. There would be some crazy Exorcist stuff happening, followed by transitions filled with demon scare actors. Some of the scenes had some really interesting imagery and made me at least a little more morbidly curious to check out the movie. The sound design and even the smells really added a lot to the intensity of the maze. Because of the sounds and smells, it was a bit of a sensory overload. But the real star of The Exorcist Believer were the scares. It reminded me of the old Insidious mazes where there were scares at literally every corner, and the scare actors were always on their A game every time I walked through. If I were to rank these houses based on how scary they were, this one would easily be number 1 for me. In fact, this was my overall favorite on opening night, but as of now, I'm putting this at my number 4 and not higher, because just like the original Exorcist maze, it was a bit repetitive and there wasn't a whole lot of variety. But I'll cut Believer some slack because it was essentially a movie trailer, so I understand that they didn't want to give too much away. But if we're being honest, the living movie trailer was more eventful and overall way better than the actual movie. Number 3 for me is going to be Chucky, Ultimate Kill Count. Now in a way, Chucky is like the opposite of Exorcist Believer. I would say it's definitely the least scariest maze of the year, but it is so impressive on a technical level. Firstly, the facade was really cool, and I liked how it set up the main premise of the maze. Even though some of Chucky's dialogue is a bit hard to hear since the background music overpowered it. I absolutely loved that they didn't once use any scare actors to play Chucky like back in the day, and they actually used animatronics. And there were so many of them too. Chucky was everywhere. I like seeing all the different kills and all the other different characters from the movies. It was very light on the scares, like I said, since it's just a bunch of dolls running around everywhere, but they make that up for being so much fun. The creative team really went all out with the concept, and the vibes were just so immaculate. The only complaint that I have, besides the lack of real scares, is pacing. The maze was divided into different sections. We spent a lot of time in the first section, which included a long hallway with nothing happening, and it only led to us seeing a prop of a dead YouTuber, which I do think is pretty funny. And then there was only like one scene in the hospital section, and it was just so uneven. I think if the little vignettes weren't included, the whole maze would have had a much better flow. But all those pacing issues aren't really all that jarring to me. It never tarnished my experiences with this house. So yeah, Chucky is my number 3. My number 2 is going to be The Last of Us. After opening night, this was my number 3. And for a little while after that, this was my number 1. But during the final couple weeks, I felt comfortable enough to put this on my number 2. I had a feeling Last of Us was going to be one of the better mazes of the year, but it still managed to exceed my expectations. Out of all the IPs to be featured at Halloween Horror Nights, out of all the movies, shows, games, works of music to ever be translated into haunted attractions, I think The Last of Us is one of the best IP to maze adaptations. Usually when they announce that a certain IP is coming to Horror Nights, fans are going to walk into it with certain expectations. They're hoping to see certain characters and certain scenes be brought to life, and if they don't see those scenes, they're going to walk out feeling let down. That was far from the case with The Last of Us. I have yet to know a single fan of the game who was disappointed of the house. And that's for good reason. It was clearly made for the fans. The facade was really cool, and the inclusion of Joel and Ellie really brought the whole thing to life. In fact, I really like the way they utilized those two characters. They get a lot of maze presence here, which I honestly wasn't expecting. The creative team really went all out with the set design. The fact that they created a whole life-size tank that actually moves and shoots and everything is so awesome. And I was actually pretty curious to see how they were going to handle this property in the Mummy location. They utilized that space perfectly here. I also really liked all of the costumes, especially for the bloaters. And the scares here were pretty decent as well. The scare actors did a fantastic job bringing their characters to life. So even though this isn't exactly my number 1, The Last of Us is still HHN at its peak. Number 1. My favorite house of 2023. And if you guys haven't guessed it already, it is Monstros, the monsters of Latin America. Now I can't lie, when I went on opening night, I think I had this at my number 4. I don't know what I was smoking that night. I think I was just expecting more, and a couple of the other houses surprised me because of how good they were. But after a couple more walkthroughs, I definitely appreciated this a lot more. I absolutely love the world building and storytelling for this maze. Similar to La Llorona, the atmosphere is just so perfectly dark and moody. You could tell the creative team had so much fun making this one. So many balls to the wall moments being brought to life with next level production value. It was just so awesome. The 3 different monsters were also pretty creepy looking, and the scares here were fantastic. Sometimes the scare actors would get really close to you. One thing in Monstros that I do think is underappreciated is the way the 3 monsters are brought together. From La Muerte, our storyteller for the maze. We see him in the facade, and I like how he comes back in the final scene, making everything come full circle. The only issue I have with this maze, which is more of a nitpick, is that El Cibon gets a lot more attention compared to La Lechuza y Tolepuchi. I wish we spent either more time with those first 2 monsters, or they could have added one more monster at the end. But other than that, There was nothing else about Monstros that I would change. Everything about this maze, from the sets, to the costumes, to the scares, to the storytelling, to the sound design, everything about it was just absolutely incredible. And that is why it's my favorite house of 2023. Now let's talk about the Terror Tram, which is themed to the Exterminators. For those of you that don't know, Exterminators actually used to be a scare zone back in 2015. Yeah, definitely didn't look that up. I do remember liking the costumes and different masks, but that was about it. Although I do remember a chainsaw guy scaring me and chasing me around, which is pretty funny to think about now. So I was interested in revisiting this concept and seeing what Murdy had in store for us. Let's start with the video pre-show. I really enjoyed the take on the whole corny infomercial you see on TV, and I think Larry Larva is very charismatic as a character. This might be a hot take, but I think he's a better character than Hollywood Harry. With Harry, he's just a crazy old man doing silly, goofy things like killing people for no reason. But with Larry, he actually has a motivation. You understand why he hates humans. So while I was on board with the story, I was still worried that the actual Terror Tram experience would be the same old. And in my honest opinion, I think they did enough to keep things fresh, especially compared to the past couple years. Instead of the same old people getting tortured and people getting their throats slit and getting their face peeled off, we get baby worms squirting water all over everybody, and we got people melting inside of barrels of squooge. The character designs are also pretty cool. I liked all the masks. I was really digging all the Exterminator stuff, but then I got sad when it ended. I was like, oh man, we're going to Jupiter's Claim already? It was kind of like the opposite of last year's Tram, where I didn't care for Hollywood Harry and the Jordan Peele section carried the whole experience for me. But this time, I was actually really enjoying Larry Larva's shenanigans, and I got bummed out, kinda, when I approached the Jordan Peele section. I wanted more Exterminators. Honestly, I wouldn't have minded seeing the bug creatures infesting Jupiter's Claim. But this isn't me knocking the tethered scare actors, they're always amazing. So overall, the Terror Tram was a big step up from last year. Honestly, quite enjoyed it. So now, we are at the point of the video where I talk about what I think of the things that aren't houses. Let's start with scare zones. What scare zones? Oh, I'm sorry, that sounded so mean, but it's just that, in my honest opinion, scare zones have truly fallen off. There's only 3 of them this year, but the first 2 zones you encounter when you first walk into the park, they always interconnect with each other, and the third zone is always an extension of the maze in the Parisian courtyard. And they always put little to no effort into the decor. And Universal's idea of creating a scary atmosphere is just them blasting loud dubstep. There's also nothing in the lower lot because it gets way too congested down there. There's nothing in the H lot because that area is just way too small. No toxic tunnel. And the park overall just has way too many save zones. I mean, yeah, there's the roaming crow family, which is really cool. But other than that, the other walk around characters in the park were just there to take pictures. And I really don't care for Universal catering to the influencer culture, which I am aware is ironic coming from a guy who makes YouTube videos, but honestly, I prefer an energy similar to Not Scary Farm and their scare zones, where there are little to no safe spaces, areas that just ooze atmosphere, and monsters that mean business. The scare actors at Horror Nights must have nightly visits from the chiropractor from constantly carrying the scare zones. Now I want to talk about the brand new shows that debuted this year. First, we have The Purge, Dangerous Waters. I wasn't really all that excited to check this out when they first announced it, but from my understanding, this was actually a last-minute decision made by the stunt team from Waterworld. It seems like they wanted to make room for a second show, which is actually pretty cool. I watched it, and I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was going to be too obnoxious for my liking, but I actually quite enjoyed it. I like how they incorporated the Purge theme and made it make sense in the Waterworld stage. I also did like the whole power to the people themes that they went for in the story. It was a cool way to make the audience cheer at all the bloodshed. And of course, the stunt choreography was awesome. My only complaint is that it's a bit too short. But yeah, honestly, the whole show in general was such a vibe. The second show this year was Blumhouse, Behind the Screams, and I was actually very curious to check this one out because I love behind the scenes stuff. Turns out there was no behind the scenes stuff, despite what the name implied. They literally just played a 2-minute reel of Blumhouse movies. The Megan dancers were cool, but after that, it just ends. And every time I went, the audience would just walk out of the whole show feeling confused and then underwhelmed. There were displays of props and costumes in the pre-show room, which was really cool. And of course, you can't talk about Blumhouse without even mentioning Five Nights at Freddy's. I think just seeing the screen-used animatronics in person was worth the wait. Besides that, I wouldn't really recommend it to anyone who wasn't interested in seeing that. And that is Halloween Horror Nights 2023. Honestly, I think this year was a blast. I think the houses are some of the best that we've ever had at Horror Nights, and there wasn't anything downright terrible this year. I had a lot of fun at every attraction almost every single time. Did you think this was overall a good year? Or did you think this was overall a bad year? What was your favorite maze? What was your least favorite maze? What did you think about the Terror Tram? Any thoughts you have regarding Horror Nights in 2023? Leave in the comments down below. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. So yeah, that's gonna be it for today's video. If you enjoyed what you saw, go ahead and click the like button. And if you want to see more content like this, go ahead and click the subscribe button. If you stuck around to the very end of the video, thank you so much for watching. And until then, see you on the fog.